How are you guys doing? He's not
Pretty good, thanks.
connected yet.
All good. And yourself?
Good.
Good.
Thanks for being early. I actually have a very tight schedule today, so I was just about to call you to see if you could
No
jump
problem.
on earlier, so I appreciate that.
Yeah,
Can
no
you guys hear
problem.
me okay?
Yeah. You can hear us?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay,
Yeah, I can
perfect.
hear both of you perfectly.
Cool.
Okay,
Sorry, I
perfect.
didn't hear what you said, Chris.
Yeah.
So how was your day? How are things going? And what were the thoughts since our last conversation? What are your fears? Let's jump right into fears, because
So
generally that's where the problem is.
yeah, so I think that in terms of the things that we were discussing is just having a partner, and
What
that's
does that
basically
look like for you?
that was the biggest fear is having a partnership with somebody else that we don't necessarily know that well. I mean, we've only known each other for a couple of months now, so I think that's been the biggest fear, to be completely honest
Okay.
with you. I
All
mean,
right.
obviously my brother and I, yeah.
All right. Let's deal with that. Sorry, my software is doing funny shit. So let's deal with that. As you know, my first partnership cost me $7 million, so I understand your fears
For
and they're
sure.
valid concerns. But how we deal with relationships or partnerships recently is planning and having a good contract, right? But having conversations when times are good to say, what happens when things start going sour? What do we do? What's our plan of action? How do we maintain a positive relationship? What if this happens? What do we do? What if this happens? What do we do? What if this happens? What do we do? Right? So it's having those conversations while things are good, because things won't always be good, because things, there's going to be good days and bad days. There's going to be challenges, right? I'm
For
going
sure.
through one of those relationships now where I'm advising, a group of young guys starting, a business, and they're they're about to make a major mistake, right? I know it,
Yeah.
but they can't see it.
Mhm.
Right? So we're about to have lunch this weekend, because the conversation we've had before is, what happens when things go sideways? What happens when the trail starts to lean a little bit and could derail? What do you do? We
Mhm.
sit down, have lunch. That's what we decided.
Perfect.
So we're having lunch this weekend.
And that's prevented from this plan that you're mentioning.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Because it's anticipating future problems we're going to create, because we always create our problems. So understanding that we always create our problems, either from lack of communication, misunderstandings, whatever it is, what do we do when this happens? Right?
Okay.
Yep.
And that's part of the agreement, the partnership agreement,
For sure.
with a shotgun clause. If we come to a point, we hit a brick wall, and I'm suggesting we go left and you guys want to go right, what do we do at that point?
Yeah.
Right? That's something that is negotiated as part of the partnership agreement. If we can't agree, then it's better not to get into a partnership.
Mhm.
Right? Nobody wants to get into litigation. Nobody wants to, to be in front of mediation.
Mhm.
Right? But those are always part of the plan. If we can't agree, right? If we each have, a 33% share or stake in the company, which is not good. Well, it's better than 50-50, but at least, two people can outvote the one person, right?
Mhm.
Um, so it's understanding the problems will happen and having a plan before the problems occur.
Okay.
Does that help you ease
I
your
would
fears at all?
100%. I would agree. And I just think that when if and when problems arise, and obviously that's inevitable, I do think that it has to be an agreement. Like I don't see it being a good relationship if it's like you were saying, if one person wants to go left and the other person wants to go right, to now say, okay, well, we're going right. So I feel like I think it would be more beneficial for us to know that whatever the problem is, whatever we're facing, if the solution is an agreement. So I think that's
I agree.
the biggest thing for us. I think as long as the three of us can agree on whatever the problem is and agree on the solution, then that would be the ideal partnership.
Yeah, of course, that's with the assumption that we are all going in the same direction. We're seeing the same vision,
Right.
which is, is not as easy as it sounds,
Mhm.
right? But when you spend enough time together, and part of that relationship, is when you're designing the business blueprint, you're spending a lot of time together and designing that book. Basically, you get to know each other on an intimate level, and that's how you're creating that vision. And just saying, it's easy for us to say, I want to get this company to $5 million or $10 million or $20 million, right? Everybody can agree on that. But the question is, how do you get there? What do we do? How much time do we put in terms of effort to get it there, right? If I work 10 hours a day or 16 hours a day and you guys are working one because you have full-time jobs, how is that a fair relationship? You see what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Right? If there's equal contribution, if I can work for 10 minutes and bring in a client that can bring in 10 clients, my 10 minutes has produced a greater result, because it's about results. It's not about time invested. It's about results, right? If I can produce, one of the strategies that I'm going to recommend you use, whether we work together or not, is the fact you need to have massive amount of followers. You need to get in front of millions of people, not just 1 or 10, right? And the way you're going to do that is with social media, right? So you need to be involved, because if you're trying to sell one client at a time, it's going to be a couple of 100 years before you make any real money. So you got to be presenting to groups of company owners, and 1% of those people say, yeah, can I have more information on that? What did you mean by this? Right? Then you start a one-to-one conversation, but you start with a funnel of thousands, or hopefully hundreds of thousands.
Okay, I think we would agree on that.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
But that's that's part of creating the need. But going back to the partnership, it's understanding. And again, the conversations we've had in the past, those are all conversations we will have again when we're designing the business blueprint. How do we add some meat to the bone? How do we do this exactly? What have we done in the past that has worked that we can reproduce to give us results, and so on, right? But in terms of partnerships, I mean, one of my partnerships that I was hoping to be a lot further along is derailing, and that's the one with the bookkeeper. We were hoping to start a bookkeeping franchise, and even though we thought we saw the same vision, she doesn't see the same vision that I do. She believes she devotes the majority of her time with working with her hands or working with the clients instead of delegating, right? Delegating or working with one client at a time only produces X number of results, right? If she delegated that work and hired 10 other people, now she's producing 10x of what she can do on her own, right? And that's that's our disconnect, and we can't seem to get back on the table, and it looks like the relationship is going sideways. But we have a plan for that. We're not going forward, and I refuse to sign a partnership agreement until until we had tested the partnership agreement, right? When people say, yeah, let's get into a partnership, no, no, no. You got to test the partnership.
Yeah.
Right.
I
And if
propose
there
time
isn't,
both that.
if there isn't a real crisis, you invent a crisis and say, okay, if this crisis were to happen today, what do we do? That's how you test a partnership. Okay. And everybody says, well, okay, you know, let's pretend this is real. What would you do? Right. And we have a conversation. And I hear your points, you hear my points. If you understand my points and I understand your points, there should be a consensus. There should be a compromise and say, okay, I like that part of your plan. Let's include that in my plan. And now we have a new plan, right? That's how we go forward. Does that make sense?
100%.
So you got to test the partnership. I don't want to lose money again, ever again in partnerships. This is why we test partnerships.
No, that completely makes sense. I think we agree.
Yeah, for sure. So how would that look, sort of testing it like as of now, let's say?
Well, we create a scenario. We create a fictitious scenario. Let's say I brought in, or you brought in, you know, clients don't want a discount. What do we do? Right? We have a price. We've agreed on the price, and we've also agreed on volume pricing. And he's just shy of volume pricing. What do we do? Do we break our own policy and bring the client in because we really want the sales? Yeah, I mean, that's not a great example because that's not going to make or break the business. But the thing is, once you start eroding your policy, right, it's a downward spiral.
What do you mean by that?
Because once you start compromising on one thing, it's
Okay.
easy to compromise on the next and the next and the next and the next,
Okay.
right?
Is this in terms of like our agreement, like us three, or like our agreement?
No, our policy in terms of company policy, we need to have a company
So,
policy.
for instance, no discounts. Let's just say.
Yeah, if that was the
Stick to that.
policy,
Okay.
then and we all agreed upon that.
Yeah.
Then that's the company policy. Until we vote to change that, or until we vote to change the volume pricing plan, then that's everybody's policy. Nobody can break policy individually unless we come together and say, well, we have this opportunity. I think he's an exception. He could bring in, you know, 10 clients and I think we should vote on, you know, changing this policy for this particular situation. But I can't go out there and unilaterally make decisions on my own and say, screw you guys, I need this client. We have to look for as the vision of the overall company, and we have to ignore our individual goals, as an example.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll give you another example. Outside this, one of my partners in an HVAC company, and I did a video on this, and I posted this on one of the Facebook groups that got 800,000, over 800,000 comments. And basically what was, I was actually in a meeting with the partner, in his office, which I don't agree with, is actually on the back of the warehouse on the second floor. He created a mezzanine, which is the opposite end of the front office. So he's separating himself, and I don't think you should do that, but that's a different conversation. Anyways, I was in a meeting with him, and all of a sudden I heard this huge commotion. People yelling and screaming and slamming doors and stuff coming from the front office. So immediately I said, what the hell's going on? And I ran down the steps and I went to the front office, and I see people yelling and screaming, and his wife, who was pregnant at the time, was crying. And I said, what happened? Yeah, he just punched a wall and he's slamming doors and he ran out. You know, who did this? You know, I'm thinking we're being robbed, right? No, it was so and so, and so happens to be our most productive employee. He produces about $10 million a year for us in terms of furnace installs, right? He produces a lot of installs for us, and he's our highest producing employee or subcontractor. But he was really upset, and I said, "Why did he punch the wall? You know, like, why is he upset?" And I mean, I only found this out like hours later because everybody's crying and I'm trying to figure out. My immediate instinct was to call the police, right? Because you can't have an employee, you know, slamming doors and punching holes in the walls and just running out. Did he run out with something? I mean, what did he steal? I mean, you don't run out. And my partner was calm and cool and collected because apparently this happened before.
Mm.
Right? Okay, so we are in a partnership, right? I know this is an outside example.
Mm.
What would you guys do? What's your instinct?
My instinct is to get rid of him.
Okay.
That's just my instinct.
It's tough to trust. Like I wouldn't if like he's hiding that from you. So I mean that's kind of my first reaction, I guess, to that.
Right. And that was my first reaction too. I want to call the police. I want this asshole arrested.
Yeah.
Right. But as we calmed down, as I investigated more, my instincts changed. Right.
Mhm.
And the reason why we had so many comments on the Facebook group was the fact that everybody said, yeah, you got to fire him. He's a huge liability. What if the pregnant lady got hurt? What if he, hurt somebody else? He has to have a drinking or drug problem. And, all these comments just went wild. Right.
Mhm.
But my partner was calm, cool, and collected. And I guess because he had seen this before from him, and he took a different stance. And I said, how can you be so calm? How can you be so cool about this? And he said, well, Leo, keep in mind, he produces a lot of money for us. And he already knew the problem. The problem was that there was a special order, and our warehouse manager, because the product was back ordered, the warehouse manager was supposed to order the same product from a different supplier, and he didn't. So the mistake was ours. The mistake was not his.
Mhm.
Yes, he overreacted. Yes, he flew off the handle. Yes, you don't punch holes in drywall, right?
Mhm.
But when you start understanding that the mistake was created by us for the second time, right? The picture starts changing a little bit. And when I sat down, and I had taken this gentleman to lunch many times, he's a hothead, obviously, clearly a hothead. But he got upset because nobody operates at his standards. We were not operating at his standards, right? He produces 3 times more than the average guy does. He installs 3 furnaces a day, furnaces, air conditioners, hot water tanks. He does 3 of those. So he does 3 houses, while the other people do 2 or 3 houses. Sorry, they do 1 house in 2 or 3 days. So do you understand the level? He's
Right.
he's a machine. And the builders love this guy. I mean, literally love this guy. Okay? Because he produces work, better quality work than everybody else. And at a rate that nobody else does. Right? So from that perspective, he had the right to be upset. Right? Not to a point where you punch holes in your eyeball, right? So we the solution was anger management. We got to control the anger. Next time you have a problem, come to me directly.
Mhm.
Right? Because obviously going through the warehouse manager channel has failed, because I guess the warehouse manager was too busy, doesn't know how to delegate, and obviously that channel. If that channel fails again, here's my cell number. And that's what I told him at lunch. Right?
Sure.
For
There's
the
almost
third time.
exceptions.
Sorry?
There is almost like exceptions in a situation like that where it's
Right.
you got to
Yeah.
dive in a little bit deeper.
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
And, and
I think we all just came to an agreement. You know, so that's like it's a pretty good example, I think.
Yeah.
Because like on face value, both of us were like, yeah, you know, fuck this guy, let's get rid of him. But now that we unpack everything, I think I can speak for Ash that we're kind of all on the same page now.
yeah, but it's presenting case studies like that and say, okay, what if this happens? But we need to find case studies that are probably a little more relevant to our
Yeah.
situation.
Yeah.
But when you start unpacking things and say, okay, how is this decision I'm about to make going to get me closer to my goal or further away from my goal? Because once you have clearly defined goals, those decisions are easy. It's when you don't have clearly defined goals, decisions become very hard. Right?
I agree.
So the question still stands, how do we work together? And again, I'm not looking for answers. I'm trying to guide you guys into making a decision that's good and fair for you. If I'm not the right guy to advise you, then I will steer you in other directions. I sit on the board every Friday. I think I mentioned, we can find somebody else. We've got 10 people on the panel. I can help you find somebody else to guide you. But you need someone that that you're comfortable with and you can be vulnerable with, because if one example is my mother. We're celebrating her 90th birthday this Saturday, and I take her to the doctor often, and she lies to her doctors. She outright lies to her doctors, right? And I'm thinking, okay, why do we do this? Why? Because how can they advise you, right, if you're lying to them, right? So there's got to be the trust. I'm like your doctor. I can't help you unless I know the truth, right? And a lot of times you think you know the truth, but that's a symptom. That's not a root cause, right? So and the reason why I have to know companies intimately and probably know your company better than you do, because I can read between the lines and I've been trained to do that for 40 years. So you need to have that level of intimacy, because what you believe the problem is usually is not the problem as business owners. So
That's interesting. Yeah.
So why don't you guys, let's end the conversation here. You guys talk about it, make a decision. If I'm not the right guy for you, I'm fine with that. If the partnership thing is not right for you, then let's talk about a purely advisory level situation where you keep 100% of the shares, and I'm purely outside advising, or we do a done for you program. And in this case, an advisory plus a done for you program plus an influencer type program might be the best answer for you, right? Because you need.
What would be the difference between those two? So advisory versus a partnership.
Well, a partnership, the reason why I own shares in companies, and I think I told you for many years, I kept saying, no, that doesn't make sense to you. But I was, I was trying to see their situation, but I can never see their situation from an outsider's perspective, right? Who am I to tell them what is right for them? Who am I to tell them, even though it makes financial sense, not to do a partnership, because a partnership is solving a temporary problem with a permanent problem. Okay? Because once I own shares in your company, now I own shares in your company permanently. It's not for 2 years or 10 years. I own it permanently, right? Or until we sell the company. But even though I explain that to people, people still want to work with someone that has skin in the game, right? And when someone is involved and has skin in the game, obviously I spend a lot more time working with the companies that I have shares in than the clients that pay me,
Mhm.
right? But there's nothing wrong with saying, Leo, let's start slow. Let's start at $500 a month, as an example, on a purely advisory program. And if we like the work you're doing for us, then we can upgrade at a later stage. The only problem with that is the commitment level. As an example, we need to find a name, and the names you presented. How do I say this delicately?
You don't have to.
So,
Right? And the thing is, if I'm a partner and we know each other and we can joke around and I can, say, fuck off, Chris, that makes
Yeah.
no sense, right? If I can talk to you and know that you're not going to get upset and not run away and say, Leo, I don't like that language. I don't think we should work together. Until that's that level, I can't really be honest with you. I can't really be true. And political correctness is the biggest problem in business today, right? Because people can't have honest communication, honest, fearless communication. Until you can get to honest, fearless communication, in my CEO club, everybody calls me the asshole. Oh, the asshole's here, right? It's a term of endearment, but they know I speak my mind, right? I know these people well enough that I can do that, and I keep getting invited back because they know they're going to get the truth from me. Am I always right? No, I'm not. But I'm open enough to say, here's my experience, and here's how I back it up, right? And how do we melt that with your experience, and how do we create these two different strategies? Because I've never seen your strategy at work, creating $100 million company. So how can we do that, right? So it's that type of conversation. When I go, as you know, I used to average 5 flights a week. As we're doing a tour of the facility, we always get a tour of the facility. I'm always anxious to get to the boardroom because I want to see the dents on the wall from people throwing coffee cups against the wall, because they're that passionate about what they're saying or their beliefs that they want to get their point across, and they'll throw a coffee cup across the room. Not to hurt anyone, but to emphasize their point, right? If you sit in the boardroom, and a lot of times I want to sit in the boardroom, and I'm just a fly on the wall, I'm not going to say a thing. And everybody's so polite. Oh yeah, I agree with that. That's beautiful. And and you've got a bunch of yes people in that room. That's a company on a downward spiral. Because if you don't have one guy or two guys that say, no, I disagree with that, and here's why I disagree with that, I passionately disagree with that, that's a mistake, right? And here's why I believe it's a mistake. If you don't have people who feel comfortable enough to say, Mr. Owner, I strongly disagree with that, right? If people are not allowed to say that, because you have these dominant personalities, and they surround themselves, their egos are not comfortable enough to surround themselves with more brilliant people than they are, then you're going to have a bunch of yes people, and you got to be able and comfortable enough to say, I disagree with that, that's a mistake, right?
Mhm.
And that's the level that we need to get to in terms of a partnership. But anything below a partnership, anything below, and for $500 a month, how much time can I really devote to your situation? How much research am I going to be able to do before we meet and talk about the problems we're going to have in the name? See, the
Mhm.
name, I believe we should be spending 200 hours on testing and researching the name, right? Then we hand it over to the VAs and they test it with at least 10,000 people, right? How we're going to do that at $500 a month, unless you're empowered to do that, and I said this, this is what we need to do, and you guys do it, and you have the staff to do it, then great, let's do that, right? because we generally work with companies that have, 10 employees or 100 employees, sometimes 1,500 employees. So I'm using your employees to implement my agenda. If you have no employees, then, we've got a problem.
Mhm.
But we still
Okay.
have to get all this work done.
I agree. But because like in terms of finding a name, like we've just been, like, to be honest, we've just been kind of coming up with them pretty much out of nowhere. So I'm not like, I mean, as you can probably tell, but we're starting to become aware of how important the brand and the name is. And I think that now it's like, okay, now what do we do? You know what I mean? Because I don't think that just coming up with a name willy-nilly and then just slapping a logo on it, I don't think that that's going to be good enough. If you look at these brands that are, the most popular in the world, like there's a lot of time that's gone into, it's a very calculated decision coming up with the
Yeah.
logo, the name, the brand. So how do you,
A name, I sincerely believe a well-chosen research name is worth $100 million. I sincerely believe that. And it's very difficult. I mean, Amazon did it. What does Amazon have to do with, Amazon Rainforest? What does that have to do with online shopping? I think they made a mistake. They did it the hard way, but I don't want to do things the hard way. I want to push the boulder downhill, not uphill. Amazon pushed the boulder uphill, and they used a lot of money to promote the boulder going uphill. Had they chosen a better name, they would have been pushing the boulder downhill. Look at KFC. After what, 30 or 40 years, they changed their brand? No, I don't want to do that. I don't want to waste 30 or 40 years.
What's a good example, would you say?
Look at Wow One Day Painting.
Sorry?
100
What was it?
Wow One Day Painting. That's $100 million company. Truly, they're doing $100 million today. Yet all other painting companies struggle for 5 to 20 years to get to $800,000, according to Google.
And then, okay. And did they just come up with that name? Like what goes in
Initially.
creating that name?
I don't know how much research they did. I'm not involved in that company. I wish I could take credit for that. I would love to take credit for that, but I'm not involved in that business. But it's brilliant. It's freaking brilliant.
Okay. Yeah, 'cause, I mean, would you say that that's probably the next step for us is a name?
Yeah, you need a name. You need a
Okay.
name. Because if you and I are going to work together, we have to make the decision. Do we want to push a boulder uphill or downhill? That's the decision you're about to make. Okay. I would rather push it downhill. I'm lazy, right?
Yep.
I'm lazy. And if you talk to any wealthy billionaires, they're going to say, use laziness against your employees. Your employees are going to be lazy. So build strategies and systems so you can be lazy and still produce more. Right?
Right.
The laziness in us pushes us to build strategies and to delegate. Right? I've got another call in 2 minutes that I need to do research, but you guys, sit down tonight and make a decision. And, I'm okay if you say, partnership is off the table. Let's start with an advisory program or whatever it is you decide. But I think you do need some help. And the question that I had for you, I didn't get a chance, is what intellectual property do you have here? Or is this a purely white label software? How much control do you have on the back end? And are you going to lose it if you do something against their policy? So think about that. Send me an email on Facebook. Let's talk again tomorrow if you have some time.
Okay. Sounds
All
good.
right. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Bye.
Well, bye.